1971, a brand new cruise line was taking shape. At a time when the golden age of the great ocean liners was beginning to fade into history, a new vision for luxury cruising was emerging from Scandinavia. It would become known as Royal Viking Line. Over the years, the company would introduce a fleet of beautifully designed vessels that became icons of traditional cruising, ships that would later become beloved names to an entirely new generation of passengers. For thousands of people, these three ships were more than just holidays at sea. They became memories, traditions, and in many cases, a part of childhood itself. Royal Viking Line was the brainchild of Varan Titus, whose ambition was to create a truly world-class 5-star cruise line. Unlike many other companies of the era, Royal Viking Line would place a major emphasis on longer worldwide voyages, sailing from ports such as Southampton, New York, San Francisco, and Miami. In 1972, the company established its headquarters in San Francisco, overlooking the home of the iconic Golden Gate Bridge. At the same time, plans were rapidly progressing for the completion of 3 identical purpose-built luxury cruise ships. Each vessel would weigh approximately 21,000 tonnes and carry just under 600 passengers, and had been intentionally designed to offer a far more elegant and personal cruising experience from what was on offer at the time. Constructed at the Wärtsilä shipyard in Helsinki, Finland, the first of the 3 sisters would eventually enter the water in 1971. She was named Royal Viking Star, and by mid-1972, the ship was finally ready to enter service, soon followed by her sisters Royal Viking Sky and Royal Viking Sea. Together, the 3 ships would soon become some of the most respected and recognisable names in luxury cruising. During an era where taking retired ferries and ocean liners and rebuilding them as cruise ships was the trend, the 3 Royal Viking ships truly did stand out. Following their first cruises, the vessels soon became a major success, and Varan Titus' vision was now truly flourishing. On board, crew members quickly came to know passengers by name. Long voyages created lasting friendships, and life at sea moved at a slower, far more traditional pace. Passengers could spend weeks crossing different oceans, visiting distant corners of the world, in an era before modern megaships, crowded promenades, and towering water slides became the norm. Inside, the ships reflected a level of understated luxury that soon became synonymous with the Royal Viking Line. Rich wood interiors, elegant dining rooms, and panoramic observation lounges gave the vessels an atmosphere more reminiscent of a private yacht than a conventional cruise ship. Before long, the Royal Viking Sisters had established themselves among the most luxurious cruise ships in the world, with many considering them to be within the top 5 most prestigious passenger vessels of their era. Following the enormous success of the Royal Viking Sisters throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s, plans were approved to lengthen all 3 vessels. The aim was simple: increase passenger capacity while still preserving the spacious and elegant atmosphere the ships became famous for. Rather than investing in entirely new ships, Royal Viking instead chose to modernise the vessels they already had. Each ship would be cut apart at the centre before a brand new 28-metre midsection was inserted, increasing their overall length from 177 metres to over 205 metres. Their tonnage also rose significantly, reaching almost 28,000 tonnes. Despite these ambitious upgrades, by the mid-1980s it was becoming increasingly clear the Royal Viking Line was struggling financially. Maintaining 3 ultra-luxury cruise ships to the exceptionally high standard passengers had come to expect was proving enormously expensive, and in 1984, Royal Viking Line was acquired by Kloster Cruises, part of Norwegian Cruise Line. Although the 3 sisters initially continued sailing under the Royal Viking name, major changes were now beginning to take place behind the scenes. By 1991, the ships had officially transferred to Norwegian Cruise Line, marking the beginning of the end for the Royal Viking era. It would also be the last time all 3 sisters sailed within the same company. 2 of the 3 sisters remained together during the transition, although under entirely new identities. Royal Viking Star became Westward, while Royal Viking Sky was renamed Sunward. Royal Viking Sea would instead move to Royal Cruises under the name Royal Odyssey, serving with them until 1997, where in a sad twist of fate, she got transferred to Norwegian Cruise Line, while Westward got transferred to Royal Cruise Line, essentially swapping lives. While for Sunward, she got sold to Princess. Westward, now known as Star Odyssey, only stayed with Royal Cruises for 2 years until 1996, where she was acquired by the small British cruise line Fred Olsen. Now, what for Sunward? Well, she got sold to Princess Cruises the same time Westward got transferred to Royal Cruises. She lasted 4 years with Princess under the now well-known name Golden Princess, but after all that, she floated between many companies, including 2 spells at Star Cruises, until joining her sister Blackwatch, the once Royal Viking Star, at Fred Olsen, and settling on her new name of Boudicca, a true symbol of independence. As for the once Royal Viking Sea, she too had finally found a long-term home. Now sailing for the German cruise line Phoenix Reisen under the name Albatros, the former Royal Viking ship had now been brought in to replace the ageing ocean liner SS Albatros, who after a long 46-year career was getting to the end of her life. Meanwhile, both Boudicca and Blackwatch were becoming increasingly beloved among Fred Olsen passengers, many of whom returned to sail aboard the ships time and time again. By now, the cruise industry had changed dramatically. Enormous modern mega ships carrying thousands of passengers had begun to dominate ports around the world, with newer vessels growing larger year after year. And yet, somehow, Blackwatch and Boudicca still managed to hold their own. Surrounded by towering 150-ton giants, the 2 former Royal Viking Sisters continued offering something many passengers believed the modern cruise industry had lost: character, elegance, and a traditional style of cruising that felt increasingly rare in the modern world. For many passengers, no modern megaship could truly recreate the atmosphere these vessels provided. The smaller passenger numbers, familiar crews, and classic style of cruising gave the ships warmth and a personality that many believed the industry was slowly beginning to lose. By 2015, both vessels were beginning to noticeably show their age. On January the 25th, 2015, Boudicca suffered an engine fire off the coast of Morocco, leaving the ship temporarily powerless at sea. One passenger later described how the vessel suddenly descended into complete darkness before beginning to slightly list. Thankfully, the situation was eventually brought under control and no serious injuries were reported. Following the incident, Fred Olsen sent Boudicca to the Blumenvoss shipyard in Hamburg, Germany, where the ship underwent a major refurbishment and technical overhaul. Emerging from the shipyard, carrying Fred Olsen's newer blue, red and white livery, both Boudicca and Blackwatch continued sailing into the late 2010s, still creating unforgettable memories for thousands of loyal passengers. Despite their age, the ships remained deeply loved, and in 2019, Boudicca once again attracted international attention after operating a special 7-night commemorative voyage marking the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, carrying over 300 veterans to Normandy while retracing the same route many had travelled decades earlier during the Second World War. The ship sailed wearing a special Royal British Legion livery in tribute to those who had taken part in the landings. For many passengers on board, it would become one of the most emotional and memorable voyages in the ship's history. Despite their advancing age, the former Royal Viking Sisters continued doing what they had done for decades, quietly carrying passengers across oceans while creating memories that would last a lifetime. But by the beginning of 2020, an event was unfolding that would change the entire cruise industry forever. Following lockdowns across the world due to COVID-19, within just a matter of weeks, ports began closing, voyages were cancelled, and cruise ships across the globe suddenly found themselves without any passengers. For Boudicca, Blackwatch and Albatros, the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic would ultimately mark the beginning of their final chapter. On August 21st, 2020, Fred Olsen announced that the 2 beloved sisters had been sold. Soon afterwards, both Boudicca and Black Watch departed the fleet they had called home for decades, before being sent to Istanbul, where they were initially expected to serve as accommodation ships for shipyard workers. Just 2 months later, Phoenix Reisen also confirmed that Albatros, the former Royal Viking Sea, would be leaving the fleet after almost half a century at sea. There were initially plans for the ship to continue operating as a floating hotel, but those plans would ultimately fall through. Instead, all 3 sisters slowly began their final journeys towards the scrapyards of Alang, India. Nearly 50 years earlier, the ships had entered service together as some of the most luxurious cruise vessels in the world. Over the decades, they had crossed oceans, changed names, sailed for multiple companies, and carried hundreds of thousands of passengers across the globe. And yet somehow, after a lifetime spent apart, the 3 Royal Viking sisters would ultimately find themselves reunited one final time on the beaches of Alang. For many people, Boudicca, Black Watch and Albatros were simply just cruise ships, but for others they became something far greater. They became traditions, places filled with memories, friendships and moments that would last a lifetime. For decades, the Royal Viking Sisters carried generations of passengers across the world's oceans, surviving changing owners, changing industries, and an entirely changing era of cruising itself. And although their lives would ultimately come to an end on the beaches of Alang, their legacy never truly disappeared. Because for the passengers who sailed aboard them, the memories they created still remain, even now. Perhaps that's why ships like these are never truly forgotten. Not because of their size, not because of their luxury, but because of the way they made people feel. And for me, they will always remain part of my childhood.